I stood in the center of David's parents' dining room, surrounded by 43 people I had known for 8 years, and watched my entire life collapse in the span of 90 seconds. The birthday cake sat untouched on the table, 41 candles melting into the frosting, while David held his phone up high enough for everyone in the first 2 rows to see the screen. The doorbell camera footage played on loop. Marcus's truck pulling into our driveway at 11:07 in the morning, Marcus walking out of our front door at 1:32 in the afternoon, Marcus's hand adjusting his belt as he glanced around the neighborhood before getting back in his vehicle. The timestamp read March 14th, 2025, a Thursday. David had been in Raleigh at a regional sales conference. Everyone in that room knew it. David's mother made a sound I had never heard before, something between a gasp and a moan, and pressed her hand against her chest. His father stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward and crashed against the hardwood floor. Marcus, who had been standing near the kitchen doorway with his wife Angela and their 2 sons, went completely white. Angela looked at the screen, then at Marcus, then at me, and I watched understanding move across her face like a shadow. She grabbed both boys by their shoulders and pushed them toward the back door without saying a word. I wanted to run, to disappear, to rewind 6 months and make different choices, but my legs would not move. My 5-year-old daughter sat at the kids' table in the corner, coloring on her paper placemat, unaware that her mother had just been exposed as the kind of woman she would one day learn to despise. David finally lowered the phone and looked directly at me. His eyes were completely dry. That was when I knew he had been planning this moment for weeks, maybe longer, waiting for the perfect opportunity to destroy me in front of everyone who mattered. He had not yelled, had not confronted me privately, had not given me any chance to explain or apologize or beg. He had simply waited until we were all gathered in his parents' home, the place where we celebrated every holiday and milestone, and he had shown them exactly what I had done. With his brother, younger brother. In the home David and I shared, in the bed we had bought together 7 years ago, during hours when I should have been at work or running errands or doing anything other than betraying the man who had given me his last name. Marcus tried to speak, but David's father cut him off with a single word I will not repeat here. Angela came back through the door alone, walked straight to Marcus and slapped him hard enough that the sound echoed off the walls. Then she turned to me and said 4 words that still echo in my nightmares. "You took everything, Rebecca." She left through the front door, and I heard her car start in the driveway seconds later. David's sister Maria started crying. His cousin Vincent muttered something in Italian that I did not understand but recognized as a curse. Someone's child asked why everyone was upset, and their mother shushed them frantically. I stood there, frozen, watching my marriage end in the same room where David had told his family 8 years earlier that he planned to propose to me. The same room where we had announced my pregnancy, the same room where we had celebrated our daughter's first birthday. Then David spoke, and his voice was so calm, it terrified me more than screaming ever could have. He said, "Rebecca, get your things and leave my parents' home. Marcus, you are no longer my brother. Mom, Dad, I am sorry you had to see this, but I needed you to understand why I am filing for divorce and why Marcus will not be welcome at family events going forward." He set the phone down on the table, picked up a fork, and cut himself a piece of birthday cake. His hands did not shake. He had planned every second of this, and he had executed it perfectly. I had given him 2 years of frustration and silence, and he had given me 90 seconds of complete annihilation. My name is Rebecca Castellano, and I am 38 years old. I work as a hospice nurse in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I have spent the last 14 years helping terminal patients transition peacefully while their families fall apart around them. I am good at my job because I understand suffering, and I understand the things people do when they feel invisible. For 2 years before that birthday party, I had felt completely invisible in my own marriage, not because David stopped loving me, but because his body stopped cooperating with that love, and he refused to acknowledge it was happening. It started in January of 2023, shortly after David began taking medication for high blood pressure. His doctor had warned him about potential side effects, fatigue, dizziness, maybe some changes in libido, but neither of us expected what actually happened. The first time he could not maintain an erection, we laughed it off. He blamed the late night, the stress from work, the third glass of wine he had consumed with dinner. The second time, a week later, he blamed exhaustion from a weekend spent helping his brother move furniture. By the third time, a month after that, he stopped making excuses and simply rolled away from me without speaking. I tried to tell him it was fine, that we could try again another night, that maybe he should talk to his doctor about adjusting the medication. He told me he was tired and went to sleep. Over the next 6 months, our intimate life deteriorated from occasional failures to complete avoidance. David stopped initiating any physical contact beyond quick kisses goodbye in the morning. When I tried to initiate, he found reasons to stay up late working on his laptop or claimed he needed to wake up early for conference calls. By summer of 2023, we had gone 3 months without any attempted intimacy. I suggested couples therapy. He said we didn't need therapy. We just needed less stress. I suggested he talk to his doctor about the blood pressure medication. He said the medication was keeping him alive and he wasn't going to mess with it over something that would resolve itself naturally. I asked him if he still found me attractive. He said, of course he did, then changed the subject. The silence around his erectile dysfunction became louder than any argument we had ever had. It sat between us at the dinner table, in the car during family road trips, in bed every night when he turned his back to me and pretended to fall asleep immediately. I started to believe that maybe the problem was not the medication at all, but me. Maybe he had stopped finding me desirable. Maybe my body, which had carried and delivered our daughter, no longer appealed to him the way it had when we first married. I joined a gym and lost 15 pounds. I bought new lingerie and left it where he would see it. I planned a weekend away without our daughter, just the two of us at a bed and breakfast in Asheville. He spent the entire weekend on his phone dealing with a client crisis and barely touched me except to put his arm around me for a photo his mother had requested. By January of 2024, we had been living as roommates for 12 months. We co-parented effectively, split household responsibilities fairly, showed up to family events as a unified front, but we had not had successful intercourse in over a year. I felt myself disappearing. At work, I counseled family members about the importance of honest communication and facing difficult realities, while at home I participated in an unspoken agreement to pretend everything was fine. I was 47 years old, married to a man who wouldn't touch me, and convinced that this was simply what happened when marriages aged. I told myself I could live with it. I told myself that companionship and partnership mattered more than physical intimacy. I told myself that I was being shallow for caring so much about sex when David provided for our family and loved our daughter and showed up for his responsibilities. Then, September of 2024 arrived, and with it came the moment that destroyed everything. David's younger brother Marcus had recently separated from his wife Angela after a series of arguments about his drinking and unemployment. David invited Marcus to stay with us for a few weeks while he got his life together, and I agreed because that's what family does. Marcus was 34, a construction worker when he could find consistent work, charming in the way that irresponsible people often are. He made our daughter laugh with silly voices and helped with yard work without being asked, and generally tried to be a helpful house guest. I felt sorry for him. I also felt nothing beyond basic familial affection until the morning of September 21st. I had worked a 12-hour overnight shift at the hospice facility and came home at 7:30 in the morning exhausted and desperate for a hot shower. David had already left for work. Our daughter was at morning kindergarten. Marcus was supposed to be asleep in the guest room. I went straight to the master bathroom, started the shower, and stripped off my scrubs. I stepped under the hot water and stood there for 10 minutes, letting the night shift drain off my body. When I finished, I opened the shower door and stepped onto the bath mat, reaching for my towel on the hook. That's when I saw Marcus standing in the bathroom doorway, frozen in place, staring directly at me. He had come upstairs to ask if I knew where David kept the coffee filters. He hadn't knocked because he thought I was still at work. The bathroom door, which I thought I had locked, had apparently not latched completely. For 3 or 4 seconds, we both stood completely still, me dripping wet and naked, and him holding an empty coffee mug and looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Then, I saw his physical reaction to seeing me, visible even through his sweatpants, unmistakable and immediate. Something in me that had been dormant for 21 months suddenly woke up. I grabbed the towel and covered myself, and Marcus stammered an apology and disappeared down the hallway. But the damage was already done because I had seen proof that I was still capable of provoking desire in a man, and that knowledge lodged itself in my brain like a splinter I could not remove. If you're wondering how a single accidental moment could lead to 6 months of deliberate betrayal, stay with me, because this story gets much worse before it gets better. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, you might want to subscribe, because understanding how I justified what came next might help you avoid making the same catastrophic mistakes I did. For 3 days after the bathroom incident, Marcus and I avoided being alone together. He apologized again that evening, stammering through an explanation that he hadn't meant to intrude and would be more careful about knocking. I told him it was fine, just an accident, already forgotten.
After David showed the doorbell footage at his birthday party, I stood frozen in his parents' dining room for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 30 seconds. Then I did the only thing I could do. I left. I walked out the front door, got in my car, and drove to my sister's apartment on the other side of Charlotte. I did not take my daughter with me because I could not face her in that moment. I did not try to defend myself because there was no defense. I did not cry until I was alone in my sister's spare bedroom with the door locked, and then I cried for 3 hours straight. My sister Jennifer had been at the party. She had seen the footage and heard the stunned silence and watched Angela slap Marcus across the face. She came home an hour after I did, knocked on the bedroom door, and asked if I wanted to talk. I told her no. She asked if I had really been sleeping with David's brother for 6 months. I said yes. She asked what the hell I had been thinking. I tried to explain about the 2 years without intimacy, about David's refusal to acknowledge his erectile dysfunction, about feeling invisible and undesired and completely alone in my marriage. She listened for about 90 seconds before cutting me off and saying that none of that justified what I had done, and I needed to figure out how I was going to explain this to my 5-year-old daughter someday when she was old enough to understand. That thought, explaining this to my 5-year-old daughter someday, broke me in ways the public exposure had not. She would grow up knowing her mother had betrayed her father with her uncle. She would hear about it from extended family members, from kids at school whose parents gossiped, from internet searches if any of this ever became public beyond our immediate circle. She would have to choose between her parents, knowing that her mother had caused the divorce that fractured her entire childhood. I had not just destroyed my marriage, I had damaged my daughter's understanding of trust and fidelity and family loyalty before she was even old enough to read chapter books. David filed for divorce 4 days after the birthday party. The petition included requests for full custody of our daughter with supervised visitation for me, citing my infidelity and moral unfitness as grounds. He requested the house, the majority of our shared assets, and child support. His lawyer was his cousin Vincent, who had been in that dining room when the footage played, and who had always liked me until the moment he discovered what I had done. The divorce papers were delivered to my sister's apartment by a process server who looked at me with open disgust when I answered the door. I signed for them, closed the door, and threw up in the nearest bathroom. Marcus called me twice in the days following the exposure. I did not answer. He left voicemail saying we needed to talk, that we needed to figure out how to handle the family situation, that Angela had filed for divorce as well and was seeking full custody of their 2 sons. I deleted both messages without responding. Whatever we had shared was over the moment David showed that footage. I did not love Marcus. I had never loved Marcus. I had used him to fill a void in my marriage, and he had used me to feel wanted during his separation from Angela. We had been each other's temporary escape from real problems, and now we were both facing the permanent consequences. The Castellano family excommunicated both of us immediately. David's mother called my cell phone 3 days after the party and told me I was no longer welcome at family events, holidays, or gatherings of any kind. She said I had broken her son's heart and destroyed her family's unity. She said she had trusted me, welcomed me, treated me like a daughter, and I had repaid that trust by sleeping with her younger son while married to her older son. She did not yell. She did not curse. She simply stated facts in a tone of absolute finality, then hung up before I could respond. I tried to call back to apologize, to explain, to beg for understanding, but she did not answer. David's sister, Maria, sent me a text message that said, "You were my friend. I defended you when people said you were not good enough for David. I watched your daughter when you needed help. I trusted you. I will never forgive you for this." David's father said nothing to me directly, but I heard through Jennifer that he had told Marcus he no longer had a son by that name, and that Marcus was forbidden from attending any family events until David specifically granted permission, which everyone knew would never happen. The family chose David, as they should have, and Marcus and I became the cautionary tale they would tell for generations about the importance of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. My own family was divided. My mother said I had made a terrible mistake, but she still loved me. My father said I had embarrassed the family and disappointed me profoundly. Jennifer let me stay in her spare bedroom, but made it clear she did not approve of my choices and thought I needed serious therapy to address whatever was broken inside me that led to such catastrophic decisions. My younger brother stopped speaking to me entirely after his wife told him he would leave him if he maintained contact with someone who had committed adultery with a family member. I had not just lost David's family, I had fractured my own. The worst part was not the judgment or the anger or even the divorce proceedings. The worst part was knowing they were all right. I had destroyed everything over sexual frustration that I could have addressed in dozens of healthier ways. I could have insisted David see a doctor. I could have demanded couples therapy. I could have issued an ultimatum that we address our intimacy issues or separate. I could have filed for divorce before betraying my vows. Instead, I had chosen the most destructive possible path, and now I was living with consequences that would follow me for the rest of my life. If you are feeling angry at me right now, if you are thinking I got exactly what I deserved, I understand. I would think the same thing. In fact, I do think the same thing. But stay with me because this story has one more twist that changed everything. Not for me because I deserved my consequences, but for David, who deserved so much better than what I gave him. And if you have made it this far, please hit the like button because stories like this, stories about real consequences for real betrayals, need to be heard. The divorce mediation happened in early May of 2025, 6 weeks after the birthday party exposure. David's lawyer, Vincent, had pushed for a quick resolution, arguing that the facts were not in dispute, and dragging out the process would only create more pain for everyone involved, especially our daughter. My lawyer, a patient woman named Karen, who had handled my sister's divorce 3 years earlier, told me I had virtually no leverage and should accept whatever David offered if I wanted any custody rights at all. We sat in a conference room at Vincent's law office, David and Vincent on one side of the table, Karen and me on the other. David looked at me for the first time since the birthday party, and his expression was completely blank. Not angry, not hurt, just empty. That scared me more than rage would have. He had processed his pain and moved past it while I was still drowning in shame and regret. He was already building a new life while I was still trapped in the wreckage of the old one. Vincent laid out the terms. David would keep the house and all furnishings. I would take my personal belongings and my car. We would split our savings account equally, which amounted to about $11,000 each after legal fees. David would have primary physical custody of our daughter, and I would have supervised visitation every other weekend and one evening per week, with supervision provided by a court-approved third party I would pay for out of pocket. The supervised visitation would continue for a minimum of 1 year, at which point we could revisit the arrangement if I demonstrated stable housing, steady employment, and completion of court-mandated therapy. I would pay child support of $600 per month. If I agreed to these terms, David would not contest the divorce or pursue additional punitive measures. I asked what additional punitive measures meant. Vincent said that David had enough documentation to pursue alienation of affection claims, parental fitness challenges, and potentially criminal charges related to adultery depending on how certain statutes were interpreted. I didn't think adultery was actually criminal in North Carolina anymore, but I wasn't about to argue. The message was clear: accept the offered terms or face even worse consequences. Karen advised me to accept. I nodded and said I would agree to everything. Then David spoke for the first time since we sat down. He said, "I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer honestly. Did you cheat on me because of my erectile dysfunction, or were there other reasons?" The room went silent. Vincent looked uncomfortable. Karen shifted in her seat. I stared at David and realized this was the first time he had acknowledged his sexual problem out loud to anyone other than me, and he was doing it in front of his cousin and my lawyer because he needed to know the truth more than he needed to protect his pride. I could have lied. I could have said there were other reasons, that I had fallen out of love with him, that I had always been attracted to Marcus, that the dysfunction was only a small factor among many. But I owed him honesty, even if it was painful. I said, yes, I cheated because we had not had successful intimacy in almost 2 years, and you refused to acknowledge it or get help or even talk about it. I felt rejected and invisible and unwanted. That does not justify what I did, and I'm not trying to shift blame, but you asked for honesty, and that is the honest answer. Your erectile dysfunction destroyed our physical relationship, and your refusal to address it destroyed our emotional relationship, and I made the worst possible choice in response to that destruction. He absorbed this without changing expression. Then he said, I knew the medication was causing problems. I knew I should have talked to my doctor about alternatives or solutions. I was embarrassed and ashamed, and I convinced myself it would get better on its own. I avoided the problem because facing it meant admitting I was not able to satisfy my wife, and that felt like failing as a man. I understand that my avoidance contributed to what happened, but you still had a choice, Rebecca. You could have left me. You could have demanded we get help. You could have done anything other than sleep with my brother in our house for 6 months while I was working to support our family. So yes, my dysfunction was a factor, but your betrayal